We've had presentations so far and Q&A. We're moving on to a discussion at this point. So just to give you a bit of context behind this discussion that you're going to be hearing next, we've been running over the last few months regular monthly rethinking cataloguing discussions where we invite various different museums, or rather they sign up, come along and discuss a particular issue related to rethinking cataloguing, the campaign that we've had going for the last year or so. So those have been sometimes hosted by a guest speaker. So what we've done is brought together several of those guest speakers together so that they can discuss this particular topic, and indeed the question that you can see hopefully on the screen: what could sharing collections data mean for rethinking cataloguing? So this conversation is going to be chaired by Dr. Arran Rees, and I know that the panel themselves are going to do introductions, so I won't duplicate that. I will very much hand over to our panel if they'd like to turn their cameras and indeed their microphones on, and this will take us up to our lunch break at 1 o'clock.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, hello, I'm Prynhawn Da, because I am coming to you from Cardiff, so I thought I'd add a little bit of Welsh in there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. As Sarah said, today we'll be having a conversation, so it will be Lisa Kennedy and Kathleen Lawther as alumni of the Rethinking Cataloguing kind of webinar series that's been happening. So we are going to have a conversation. Hopefully it will be of interest to you. We'll be talking about the different threads of our work that we either have in common or how we can offer alternative perspectives, thinking about sharing collections data along the way. So to start off, we're all going to have a few minutes just to say a little bit about ourselves, almost like do our opening pitch of what we're all about, and then we'll come together in a conversation. So without much further ado, Lisa, would you like to kick it off for us?
Sure, thanks, Arran, and thanks everyone for being here and taking time to hear what we have to say. My name's Lisa Kennedy, and I'm a writer and a researcher who advocates for the wider inclusion of perspectives within collections, artworks, and the study of history. And I focus on this from a socially engaged lens, but I'm also exploring the role of user research as well. And that might be something you're more aware of in terms of audience research. So trying to bring and understand voices outside of institutions in terms of how we can improve the experiences of people when they interact with institutions. And I've been focusing mainly on trying to understand approaches to problematic language within collections, artwork title and descriptions, and just how we describe people. And I've been very privileged to work with organisations such as Collections Trust, Art UK, Bath Abbey, Bath and Colonialism Archive Project, the Museum of London, the University of Arts London, Decolonisation Arts Institute, and a Contemporary Art Society to really interrogate what does that look like and what does that mean through conversations before action, but always to inspire action and movement so that we're not just circling through conversations and not actually doing anything. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding about who I am and what I hope to bring to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Kathleen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Arran. Thanks, Lisa. So to introduce myself, you viewers might know about me and my work from a recent project that I did with the Powell Cotton Museum, who already got a shout out this morning for their excellent work, which was looking at people-centered cataloguing. But I'm not going to talk too much about that, partly because I already have done a lot on Collections Trust platforms. I'm also currently a PhD researcher, so I'll talk a little bit about my PhD project, but I wanted to reflect on another project that I was involved in that I was able to attend a series of workshops, and I will be contributing to a publication for this project, which is really relevant, I think, to connecting collections data which was called People and Plants, and which was run by the by National Museum Scotland and Kew. And it was a series of workshops bringing together museum workers and people from originating communities of collections of ethnobotanical material to talk about the collections and information about them. And it really, I think, chimes with a lot of has been discussed this morning. So one of the really influential workshops I attended was about Indigenous Australian material from Western Australia, which was collected by someone called Emil Clement. And that name might ring a bell because he was a prolific collector and vendor of this material and sold it to museums all over the UK and Europe. And I can't remember the statistics, but a good proportion of the Australian material in UK museums is from this one collector. And so it's a really interesting opportunity to for museums who share this provenance to come together and learn more about it, because often we don't know what other museums have similar material to us. And it's something that connecting collections data would really help with. But the other thing that those workshops really made me think about was the issue of who has the right to knowledge. So again, thinking about Tammy's presentation earlier, thinking about Indigenous kind of sovereignty around collections, and the idea that sometimes it's best not to share information in order to respect people's views and museums' kind of obligations to kind of respect those different beliefs. But the other thing, so the third thing that I think makes this series of workshops really relevant is that it showed me that it's not just about sharing data, it's about having conversations, because actually being in a room with lots of museum professionals and with two Indigenous Australian community knowledge keepers to have a discussion about those collections was so valuable in really understanding everything that's at stake here. So I think that that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of. If we are sharing data, we also need to be sharing discussion and conversation. So finally, just to quickly sum up my introduction, to tell you a little bit about my PhD, which is Ross Parry, who was connected to the previous panel, as my supervisor, so hi Ross. I'm looking at the history and practice of collections documentation and how that impacts what we now have available for us to share as digital collections or collections information. Because I think we talk a lot about, and we've talked a bit this morning about the technological barriers to sharing, like data infrastructure, but that's not the only barrier. There's also kind of behaviors and attitudes within museums which sometimes prevent us from sharing information. So in some ways that's good. So it could be thinking about respect for traditional knowledge keepers, that you wouldn't share information that they wouldn't be comfortable being shared. But there's also the side that museum professionals can have the fear of exposing what they don't know about collections, or in fact, it might be that things are not documented, so there's no data to share because it's not been properly documented and catalogued into the systems. So yeah, that is me, and that is some of the issues that I'm interested in. So I'm excited to get discussing it with the two of you.
Great, thanks so much, Kathleen. I'll just quickly say a few words as well. So I'm Arran Rees, my pronouns are he, him. I am a museum researcher and practitioner, and I'm currently employed by the University of Leeds working on the Congruence engine project with Science Museum, which is one of the towards the National Collection project that Liz Thompson mentioned earlier. And the very basis of the Congruence engine project is looking at how we connect different collections. So it's really kind of quite important here. All with the view of thinking about what a digitally connected national collection of heritage materials might look like in the future. So what sorts of new stories might we be able to tell about our past if we were able to search across collections? What sort of insights might be made available if our collection information is shared in machine-readable formats and usable in a range of different ways of computational methods? Those are the sort of things that we're looking at. So the vision here is exciting. However, trying to standardize data is complex. Interoperability isn't simple, especially if we're being mindful of the different reasons why data exists in different formats, as well as for the reasons Lisa and Kathleen have already kind of alluded to in their introductions there. We need to be careful not to flatten and overly simplify collections data and knowledge that comes from different museums, different types of organization structures, and different communities. So I think a plurality of ways of communicating knowledge is important, and questioning some of the kind of Western processes that simplify whether data is true or valid is essential as part of our work in kind of decolonizing our institutions as well. And I think Tammy's presentation really spoke to that earlier. But personally, I am interested in how we can queer approaches to collections data as well. So how can we move away from binary forms of documentation? How can we introduce nuance and ambiguity in a productive way into our collections data? Despite what we're being told in political party conferences right now, we do not actually live in a world that is binary, and forms of knowledge and organizations and systems that we use to describe our collections often seek to kind of put that kind of binary form of classification in place. So clearly there is a tension between sharing structured interoperable data in a lovely, beautiful world, and some of the challenges that we're all interested in talking about. And they're challenges that I don't think we can ignore. And luckily projects like the Sensational Museum, which we just heard about now, they're already doing some active thinking there. So it's really exciting. So now we've all had a chance to say a few words. I think it would be good to start discussing some of the kind of connections between our work as well. And so building on what we've already said, I suppose, it would be good to start thinking about maybe what do you think are the key benefits to sharing collections data alongside the challenges to doing that? I don't know if one of you wants to come in first on that. I should probably just choose someone, shouldn't I? Go on, Kathleen, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think I tried to touch on this a little bit in my introduction. I think there are clear benefits thinking about, I guess, because my work is in collections documentation, I've been very much until doing this PhD within a museum setting. So I'm thinking about the benefits for museums and museum workers, which sounds quite introspective, but actually I think that then has a knock-on effect to benefits for other users. But thinking about museum users, as I mentioned, so many museums have collections which might share contexts or provenance or even the same collector, and they might not necessarily know which other museums have similar material. And especially, I've done quite a bit of work with collections from former colonies of the British Empire. And I know a lot of museums are thinking about those collections in terms of potential repatriation, but also to make sure that that the information that they have is accurate and respectful. And actually, I really like the phrase which Tammy used, which was rectifying misrepresentation, because that kind of acknowledges the harm that has been done previously. So I think that if workers within museums are able to share information about similar collections that they have, it just stops having to kind of replicate the same work happening in each context. And that's not to say that those museum workers shouldn't then be trying to speak to people who have more cultural knowledge of those collections, because I think you need to avoid it just being talking within museums and then not talking to anyone else, but it's a step in the process to share that information. And yeah, I think also some of the barriers are that they, and again, thinking about those kind of collections, their museums have become very aware that what information they have is problematic, which is ironic in a way because they've been sharing and using that information for hundreds of years and hadn't necessarily thought to do anything about it. But so now they might be reticent to be open and honest with sharing that information. But I think that being open and honest is key to actually starting to rectify some of those issues.
Brilliant, thank you. Lisa, do you have any thoughts you want to share here as well?
Yes, I'd say that I'll take a different approach to Kathleen's, but I think it's really important to look at things from an internal perspective for sure. But I think one of the challenges of sharing collections data is it's all good and well to have this intention, but who is it really for? And what's the relevance? Why should anyone care? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but we have to always remember that museums are places for people, and there has to always be this understanding and some sort of relationship with people in order for the work that museum workers do to have purpose. So I'm always trying to understand, okay, whenever there's, this new type of initiative to try and engage people with a certain collection or a certain museum, I don't think there's always enough time that's taken to think about how does this relate to the audiences that you seek to engage with, and why should they spend their time deciding to connect with that? What's the benefits for them? Because people need to understand that in order to make an informed decision on whether they want to engage with it or not. And we think, as museum professionals, a lot of us think that just the existence of these spaces and the fact that you may have collections about really important things, and I say this as someone as a historian, those things are very important to me, but I think we also need to step out of ourselves, out of our internal bubbles, to actually understand relevance from a wide range of perspectives, because what relevance means to you and I can mean something completely different to just anyone, because we're all individuals and we all have different things that motivate us to choose to engage with or not engage with something. So I think that's one of the main challenges, because what's the point of doing a project if the people that you seek to engage with don't actually engage with all of that, hard work and resource and time that is already stretched and limited based on a whole set of barriers that I'm sure we're all very aware of. So I think one of the things that for me is the biggest challenge with sharing collections data is to the people that we want to engage with.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I love seeing all the reactions there from the audience, so thank you. Yeah, and I suppose as well, something I've been trying to think about recently as well is, with our collections data, the reasons why we record collections data has changed over time as well, and the nature of it. So for one of the polls that Liz put up earlier on about why are you using your CMS or something, that there was audit on there, and for a lot of us, collections management started as do we know what it is and do we know how to find it? And then it's gradually turned into the information we record in our collections management system has turned into more kind of interpretive and historical pieces of work. And there's this kind of stuck between it being an audited tool and a public facing tool, and then having to have multiple layers to speak to different people and different interests. And I think it's a really difficult question, really. I am aware of time, and I know, Lisa, you need to pop off a little early, don't you? So I would really like for us to talk about kind of challenging collections data. And if we're going to think about sharing it, I think some of the stuff that you were interested in terms of problematic language and gaps in knowledge in collections, I'd be really interested to hear kind of what you think are like some of the key challenges there. What can museums be doing to kind of get over that fear of releasing information or addressing it beforehand? I don't know what your thoughts are there.
I think you made this really good point, Arran, in your introduction about the ambiguity. I remember there was a time when I was working at Battersea Arts Centre, and it was probably like a collections manager's nightmare of not knowing the locations of where all of the objects are. And I really had to learn, and it was very uncomfortable coming from a place where, knowledge is about what's documented and what we know. And if it's not there, is it really knowledge? And that experience really taught me to sit with the uncomfort of working from a place of ambiguity. So I know that I can't find this information in this case. It's not to say the case for different collections and different sets of knowledge production. But for me, that was a big lesson that taught me to sit with the ambiguity and think about, how can I work from this place of not knowing and unknowing? And it made me think about challenging authority and, posing provocations about, where do we actually seek knowledge from? Is it from a limited source, or is it from places that it's always been done, it's always this person, it's always this publication? For me, I think it starts with asking lots of questions and understanding, where do you start from at first, and then being challenged to actually think about, okay, what is uncomfortable for you in this place? Because if we want to really address these gaps in knowledge, we have to actually sit with the uncomfort, but we have to do something about it, because for too long people have been sitting with the uncomfort and they don't know what to do. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, but it's about, how do you move past that? Because progress doesn't occur if there's no movement, if there's no impetus. So I'd say really start with kind of provocations. What is the uncomfort that you're experiencing? What or where is the knowledge production processes that are missing from the process in which we gain knowledge? Who do we develop relationships with outside of museums, funders, other cultural institutions that are perhaps doing things in a similar way to us? Where are those kind of knowledge keepers that Kathleen mentioned? And how do we build relationships with those people in equitable ways in which knowledge is not extracted, but it's actually done in a way that is respectful and they're remunerated for their time, and it's more holistic? I think it's about just really starting with provocations to challenge us to move from the place that we're already at, because if we don't, then we're just going to really continue these conversations, and then lots of people will be questioning, what is the progress that's actually been done in between, this conversation that we're having now and conversations that have been long occurring for since the inception of museums, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of, that almost like unsureness of kind of what's in your systems and where it's come from, I think is really, really important there. And I think that's really relevant for your work as well, isn't it, Kathleen? I don't know if you want to come in here.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really good points. And I take the point about kind of starting from where we're from, because actually, having done a lot of reading about the history of these museum systems, like, we think of museums as being the repositories of knowledge as well as collections, but museums have actually never been very good at storing and recording and maintaining all of that knowledge. Inventory was mentioned earlier, and obviously current events in the news have kind of shone a spotlight on that, but it has been a recurring theme every couple of decades. So, someone will realize that museums don't have their inventories in order, and policies change, things come in, but it's not actually something that museums have been great at. And so it's kind of about not thinking of the museum as the one place to store knowledge, acknowledging not only do other people and bodies outside of the museum have this knowledge, but actually the museum doesn't need to necessarily take it. I think that there's this idea of extraction that even in projects which claim to be sort of decolonial practice, in reality, what's happening is that museums are then going out to people from communities and asking them, like taking from them, taking knowledge, and that's really replicating these colonial practices. So it needs to be more of an even partnership, and part of that is to do with funding. As Lisa mentioned, remuneration is so important, and I think our funding bodies don't necessarily support that. So often, even if the museum is sharing some of its funding, it is the lead partner, and it's kind of an uneven relationship. So slightly lost my track of thought, but I think it is about, as Lisa said, it's holistic. It's thinking about the museum as part of a kind of network of knowledge and information about collections.
Yeah, definitely. And the knowledge that is built up is a generational knowledge as well, isn't it? It's never one person. It's not, but it's all kind of opaque as well, how that's come together. So it's really, really complex to unpick. I suppose the final thing that I think would be good for us to try and talk about would be about who decides what is valid collection knowledge to be shared, who decides whether or not the collection's knowledge should be shared. And I think that's been kind of floated around a few times already today, and I think that it's a really important question. Lisa, would you mind if starting there, and then we'll move to Kathleen? Yeah, cool.
I think that's a really hard question, because I think it really depends on the situation that we're talking about. And I think Tammy made a really good point earlier on. You know, our contexts are very unique, so you can't really apply this universal approach when we're like depending on what is being discussed, who is being discussed, what heritage are we talking about. But I would say in terms of some guiding principles, I think it's a discussion, and I'm going to draw on socially engaged practices, because I think this way of thinking really helps with these kind of questions which are difficult to answer. But I don't think decisions need to be made by one person or one partner, because that puts a lot of pressure on that partner or that person to make the right decision. And what is the right decision? We all have different concepts of what is right. And again, I know there's clear barriers of what is right depending on what we're talking about, but it's difficult to say without having that context. So I would say I would actually reframe and actually think about, okay, how do we seek to make a decision about this? And in terms of the socially engaged practices that I would employ if I was in that situation, I would be discussing, are we thinking about things from a shared authority model? Has the institution, relating to what Kathleen was saying about the funding structures, in terms of that lead museum, has that lead museum decided within their application, which has been accepted, that the way decisions are going to be made is going to be from a shared authority perspective? Because I think that changes the balance of, I don't want to say power, but it changes the balance of what decisions are made and by how and by who. So I would really encourage, if that's a space that people are in, to think about what is the hierarchical structure in which you're having these conversations, because the more hierarchy there is, the more pressure that you have to make a so-called right decision. And what if you're not the person that is the best person to make the right decision? I don't think things always have to be done on your own, despite us living in quite an individualistic society. You can do things together, but you have to allow space for conversations to arise, to see what different perspectives there are and how you can come together to make decisions in a way that actually reflect more people, which takes more time, more energy, more effort. But I think better outcomes come from that, rather than always trying to rely on one person or one institution to make that decision all by themselves.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it comes down to trust as well, isn't it? Like, how can the museum be trusted to make these decisions when you're dealing with communities that perhaps have been disenfranchised by the museum in the past as well? There's a lot of relationship building, and that shared authority model is really important. We've got 2 minutes, so Kathleen, I'm going to come to you for that, and we're just going to hopefully end bang on time. It'll be perfect, so no pressure.
Well, that is a bit of pressure, Arran, for 2 minutes. Yeah, I don't know if I've got much new to say apart from just to reiterate what Lisa said. I really agreed with all of that. And I think that, yes, it does take longer but it's worth the time and investment to do things right or do things better. And I think it's a shame because it kind of comes back to the funders and what gets funded, what gets core funding, because I think that we need to invest in taking this time and working more collectively, and working with more people. I think it's really important to work in partnership. The projects that I've worked on that have been successful have been where my role has been as the kind of documentation, collections information person who knows the museum systems, but then working in collaboration with people who know the collections from a different perspective, who are have cultural knowledge and academic expertise. And I think that to be really successful, you need to bring all of those people and more together for a project to work. And obviously that costs more money to pay people properly for their time and to acknowledge all of that different expertise.
Perfect, look at that. And it is 12:59. So I mean, that's the end of our conversation. Thank you so much to Kathleen and to Lisa, and thank you to Sarah and Collections Trust for having us as well. I'll shut up now, so you can go and have your lunch. But we'll be around, I think, some of us, if you want to ask any questions as well in the chat. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Kathleen, to cut
I was
you off
just saying
there.
thank you, Arran, and thanks for having us.
Thank you both. And thank you as well to Lisa. I know Lisa had to dip out just a couple of minutes early, but I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking all of our panel there, Arran, Kathleen and Lisa.